I'm not sure if anybody's going to be able to join, so this might just be me in the video, but that's good enough. So, welcome to the first Latin prose, Twitch video. So, unfortunately, in class today, we had the, technological issues, so I just wanted to reiterate a few things that we didn't really get a chance to talk about. Veronica's here, so we're all good. Okay, Veronica, if you're supposed to be in another class, I'm looking at you, okay? So, there's just so many verb forms to cover, in Latin that it's really hard to, like I said in class, it's really hard to do this in one. So I kind of want you guys to attack each section of the synopsis a little, at one at a time, and really ask yourself, is this something I can do on autopilot, or is this something that I need to go back to? The indicative forms, this first, section, just sort of the basics about how principal parts work, using the first two principal parts for the present system, using the last two for the perfect system. So we'll do many, many practice synopses in class and over video, so you should be able to get a little bit more practice. But if that's something that you need to go back to, particularly things like the present, okay? We're only reviewing homework from last week, but you're in class. Get out of here. If I could kick you, I would, but then you wouldn't be able to come back. Don't let anyone know. Imperatives we did get a chance to talk to. So the normal, what we call present imperatives, we chop off the RE, we add a TE to make it plural. So salve, salvete, vale, valete, something like ama, amate, lauda, laudate. And of course, third conjugation has to be difficult, right? We would get the I in there for the plural. So for instance, keep thinking of all the irregular ones, kappa and kapite, duke and dukate, fak and fakate. Future imperatives, we add the TO. Excuse me. And as I said in class, future imperatives typically used for legal documents or recipes, where you're essentially telling somebody what they're going to need to do in the future. We did get a cut off a little bit. Of course, I'm losing my voice right now. We got cut off a little bit when we were talking about participles. So these are forms that we're going to keep coming back to. A reminder that a participle is an adjective. So when you make these participles, you need to be ready to decline these participles as well. So the present active participle, which is the one where we add the ns, right? Ens, entis, that one is going to be third declension. So for instance, movenes, if you're describing somebody who's moving something, movenes, moventis, moventi, moventem, moventi. Moventes, moventium, moventibus, moventes, moventibus. The other ones are all first and second. They're all your us, a, 2-1-2 adjectives. I know some teachers refer to them as 2-1-2, but that's your standard first and second declension endings, which I know you guys know how to do. Gerunds are a new thing. Sometimes maybe you talked about them a little bit in the 9th grade, but a gerund is essentially a verbal noun, meaning that we're not describing somebody who is eating, we're talking about the action that is eating. And it does have some funky forms to it. Like, for instance, if eating is the subject of your sentence, then you don't really say eating, you say to eat. So the nominative form is the infinitive. If you wanted to say eating is good, you would say edere bonum est, right? And if you listen carefully to that, bonum est tells you what gender is the infinitive. Okay, if you think it's bonum est, what gender would that be? As I take another sip of water and do the Blues Clues thing where I wait for you to answer. I imagine all of you little kids sitting at your screen screaming, neuter, it's neuter. Yeah, it's neuter. Okay. When you put the gerund into other cases, when you have to decline it, for instance, in the genitive, if you talked about, for instance, the art of cooking, or the joy of cooking, which is a great cookbook that your parents might have, then we have to go into the gerund form. And to make it, we take that stem and we add nd, ndi. If it's dative, for instance, if you wanted to have an adjective that goes with dative, something is useful for cooking, you might have coquendo, edendo, some form in the dative case. Accusative is most often seen with the preposition ad. So if you use it with ad, it shows purpose, right? So Caesar, last year you guys might have encountered, he likes to say that we packed up all of our things ad proficiscandum. I packed everything up for the purpose of setting out, for the purpose of leaving. So that's probably the most common one that you're going to see. And then ablative would be any reason why you would use the ablative. So if you wanted to say, I learn best by reading, right? Or I get my exercise by walking. Or you could even say something like, sleeping is better than exercising, which would be in the ablative case. So any reason to have something in the ablative, you could see this gerund doing that as well. And gerundive basically means the gerund is with another noun. So instead of talking about just reading, for instance, you could say reading books, right? I learn by reading books. Or this cup is useful for drinking tea. Where you have that extra noun that's built into it, okay? That changes it to what's called a gerundive. All that means is the two words are now going to agree with each other. So if you are reading books, books is plural, so now reading becomes plural. So it essentially acts like an adjective. More on that in class. Infinitives, those are most important for indirect statement, which is a concept that we're going to review quite a bit. The present active infinitive, the very first one that you learn, it's your second principal part. Are, ere, ire, ura, whatever it happens to be. To make it passive, we change that ere, or that are, or that ire, whatever it is. For most verbs, you're just changing the very last letter, right? So for are, you're going to make it ari. For ere, you're going to make it eri. Third conjugation, the whole ere goes away, and it's just replaced with an I. Anything perfect active is going to be your third principal part. So we did moeo in class. This is mowissa, amawissa, duxissa, deexissa. Even for sum, it would be fuissa. Right? So whatever the third principal part is. And perfect passive is always the fourth principal part. Ductum esse, dictum esse, amatum esse, positum esse, whatever the fourth principal part happens to be. Future active is the participle. It's that urus form with esse. Ducturum esse, futurum esse, amaturum esse. It's always that UR form. And then the future passive one we really don't see very often. Most teachers don't even really teach it because it's so rare. It's the fourth principal part paired with this word eerie. But again, we're not going to be too concerned with that. Subjunctives, the big old world of subjunctives. Obviously, we could spend days and days talking about them, but I just want to focus in on some of the basic rules for how to make them. So present is all about changing the vowels, right? You guys might remember a saying like, she wears a diamond tiara, some kitschy little saying that your Latin teacher taught you at some point. So the long and short of it is basically A's and E's switch places, which is why first conjugation becomes an E. It used to be an A, now it's an E, and all the other conjugations have A's to them. So if you think about she wears, EA, diamond, diamond, IA, tiara, IA, they all have A's in them. So first conjugation becomes the E, everybody else gets an A. Imperfect subjunctive is the easiest one to make. You take the second principal part and you slap an ending on it, which is something that we would never do in the indicative. We're always chopping off that RE, but for subjunctive, that's how we do it. So you take amare and you add a NT, you get amarent. Or you take dicere, you add a T, dicaret. Or, even something like esse, right, the verb to be, you get essem, esses, esset, essemus, essetis, essent. Perfect active is always third principal part. Perfect passive is always fourth principal part. And we pair it with certain endings, right? So perfect active, we get duxerim, duxeris, duxerit. For pluperfect, we'd get duxissem, duxises, duxiset. And on the passive side, we pair it with forms of sum, like we always do, except subjunctive forms of sum. So instead of it being amatus sum, it's amatus sim. And instead of it being amatus eram, it's amatus esem. So we use the subjunctive alternatives. Now that is a ton of information coming at you all at once. So this is basically a guide. You go section by section, you say, I remember participles, I got participles on lock, maybe infinitives or something that I need to go back to, okay? And as we do this synopsis together, hopefully it'll jog your memory a little bit. Whenever you do a synopsis, you want to think of it like muscle memory. You want to do a synopsis the same way every single time. And that way your brain almost turns off and you just kind of start doing it on autopilot. So you always want to get into a routine when you do them. If you practice synopses enough, eventually they should become automatic. First question you always think about is what conjugation, which is going to matter for quite a few of the forms. So if you look at fingo, fingera, right? What conjugation is that verb? I don't know if we got anybody in the chat right now. If you're in the chat, let me know. Otherwise, I will. Hey, what's up, Bill? Oh, I hope you're not supposed to be in a class right now, Bill. So, oh, you're in it, buddy. This is it. Here we go. So, Bill, if you want to answer questions, you're more than welcome. If you just want to chill, you're more than welcome to do that too. But I'm asking what conjugation the verb fingo is. Fingo, fingera. You gonna show off your sweet Latin knowledge? You're like, nah, I'm good. Oof. Oh, my dude! It is third conjugation. So you had me last year, so you know how I feel about third conjugation. Crazy things happen in the third conjugation. It all has to do with that letter E. That letter E is going to do some funky, funky stuff. Okay? So for instance, when we do the present, it's not actually going to be an E. It's going to be an I. Right? So we get fingit. Can make these a little bit bigger, I think. 16, is that going to mess it up? No, we got it. So we get fingit. Now when I do a synopsis, I always start left, right, left, right, left, right. So fingit, fingitur, right? Just changing the ending to the passive. We get fingebat and fingebatur, which I believe we did together in class, my Prose kids. What a class it was today. Woo. And finget and fingetur. Right? So for third conjugation, we have an I in the present, we have an E in the future. That's kind of the pattern of how it goes. For perfect active, if this were my class, this would be the moment where everyone would hopefully either scream out loud or scream inside of their own brains. Perfect active is always the third principal part. So we're going to use finksy for the time being. So we're going to take that stem thinks, right? Thinks, and we're going to start slapping some endings on it. So we get thinksit, thinkserat, and thinkserit. I think I missed a long mark. Thinksit, thinkserat, thinkserit. And you'll notice the way I did that. I went down the chart. And I go down the chart to remind myself that I'm just going to keep using that principal part. What sometimes happens here is you get so excited about the passives that you do something silly. And you move over here and things don't work out so well. So once you switch over to perfect passive, we have to move over to the fourth principal part. And this synopsis is singular and masculine, so we're going to go fictus. Right, we're going to keep it just the way it is. And we're going to pair it with est, erat, and erit. So fictus est, fictus erat, fictus erit. And that is an indicative synopsis. So you have 12 forms, the first 6 are based on these 2 principal parts. The last 6 are based on these 2 principal parts. So you want to kind of get that symmetry in your brain, right? Half the forms come from the half the principal parts, the other half of the forms come from the other half of the principal parts. The imperatives, because it is third conjugation, right? We got to be on the lookout for some funky stuff going on. Change my layout here real quick. And to make the singular imperative, we just chop off the E. I always, on my synopses, will add the exclamation point after the imperative, not so much because it would be there in Latin, but just to remind myself that that is what an imperative looks like. So we have thinga, and in the plural, because it's third conjugation, thingeta, I-T-E. The future imperatives, which we talked about today, might be a little bit new to you. This is where we say thingito and thingitota. So that I, that third conjugation I, is going to show up again. So when we go over to the future ones, we have this I in here. Thingito, thingitota. These should be old hat for you guys. These might be a little new. Okay. For the participles, my favorites. Love me a good participle. Okay. Oops. We lost the document. Where are we at? There we are. Okay. I want that button. There we go. There are 4 participles in 6 boxes. So knowing the 4 participles is great. Also knowing which 2 don't exist. And it's always the same. This one doesn't exist. There's no present passive. And there's no perfect active. Those 2 participles, the language just does not have them. So for the present participle, this is your, get my bold on. I personally, at this level, if it's a singular synopsis, you can just put fingains. You can put fingains. You don't have to put fingentis. I trust that you guys know ens becomes entis. Then we have fictus, ficturus, and fingendus. So looking at these 4 forms, right, you'll notice that the first one and the last one kind of look the same. They're kind of based on the same stem. We got finga and finga. And these 2, fictus and ficturus, are based on the same stem. So they almost create like a nice X, right? The first one and the last one are the same. The other 2 are the same. So if you drew lines, you get like a, would be a perfect X, but it'd be pretty close. Okay? Now you don't need to put the meanings here, but just a reminder of how the participles work. You have your ing, right? Somebody who's fingains is somebody who is shaping something or pretending, right? That's another meaning of fingo. Fictus is something that's been shaped or something that's been created. Ficturus is someone who is about to shape something, about to form something. And fingendus is something that must be formed. So those are your meanings of your participles. The gerund, which is the new kid on the block, okay? That's the only form on here where you're kind of declining it, right? You're putting different endings on it. And I'll always give you the nominative form, which is just the infinitive. So you're really filling in the others. And the gerund is pretty straightforward. Your options are really ondi, if it's first, endi, if it's second or third, and endi, if it's third IO or fourth. So what we're going to have here is fingendi, fingendo, fingendum, and fingendo. Those of you who are students of or speakers of the Romance languages, particularly Spanish and Italian, you'll recognize these ing forms, right? So if you know how to make your progressive forms, estoy hablando or sto mangiando in Italian, that ando, endo, iendo, that's where it came from. It came from this form in Latin. So this is the idea of pretending. So when you would say in Spanish, estoy hablando, you're literally saying, I am right now the act of speaking. It's a weird translation, but that's how they do it. Okay? So that's our gerund. We have our infinitives, which again, we use an indirect statement, which is a hugely important concept that you better believe we will review. But to make our infinitives, the first one is a freebie. Fingere. Don't have to do anything to it. The passive one would be fingi. Because it's third conjugation, the whole ere goes away. For perfect active, anything perfect active is the third principal part. So finks issa. Perfect passive, anything perfect passive is the fourth principal part. So fictus essa. I typically am going to fill this in the accusative form, only because that's the one that you see most often. So you'll often see me filling it in as fictum essa. Over here we've got ficturum essa, much like our participles. And then over here, to be quite honest, most of the time I will probably just fill this one in for you because it's so weird. Fictum ire. It's always the fourth principal part, ending in um, plus this weird word ire after it. You're really never going to hear me translate infinitives because translating infinitives is a tricky subject, because more often than not, you don't translate them like infinitives. You don't translate them with the word to. You kind of translate them like a normal verb. It's just the situation that they are in requires them to be an infinitive. So for instance, if you wanted to say in Latin, I know that he pretended, you would actually use finx issa, because it's that second verb in what's called indirect statement. So you're really never going to translate it as to have pretended, which would be the sort of literal translation. So we're never really going to go and put those in some kind of a translation machine. It really depends on what the sentence looks like. And then last but not least, we have our subjunctives. Subjunctives are the sort of extra tool in the tool belt. So essentially a subjunctive would be used in a situation, in a type of clause that indicative just wouldn't work in. And the rules for subjunctive are always language specific, and they're always just kind of, you know them when you see them, or when you hear them they sound right. It's like saying in English, if I was you. That doesn't sound right to me. Maybe it sounds right to you, but to me it doesn't sound right. In that situation where you say if, you don't say I was there. You say if I were there. And believe it or not, that's the subjunctive. That's the only subjunctive left in English, unfortunately. But certain situations, you just have to tweak your verb form a little bit because it doesn't sound right. And if you ask somebody who's a native speaker of a language with subjunctives, they might not be able to articulate to you why. They might not even know it's something called subjunctive, but they just know it feels right to use it in that situation. And that's the way subjunctives work. They're kind of a feeling. So to make a subjunctive, to make a present subjunctive, each tense has its own rules. So present, we change the vowel to an A. So we get fingat and fingator, I believe. Yep. Fingat and fingator. So that's that situation where the A's and E's start flipping around. Okay, fingat and fingator. For the imperfect, that one's the easiest one to make. You take the second principal part, fingere, and you just add an ending to it, fingeret. And over here we get fingerator. Fingerator. Those long marks that appear over on the passive side, those are pronunciation long marks. so don't worry too much about them. Perfect active, anything perfect active. Yes, you screamed it at your screen, I can tell. We go to the third principal part, and in this situation we add erim, eris, erit. And for pluperfect, we're still going to use that third principal part. That would be thinks. And in this situation, we actually add iset. So there's a couple of ways that you can look at this. You can think about iset as being an ending, or you can think of finksissa, which is the infinitive from up here, borrow that infinitive, and just slap an ending on it. You could think of it either way. Anything perfect passive is always the fourth principal part, so fictus, and instead of est, we use the subjunctive form of est, which is sit. And then to make it pluperfect, we add esset. And you can think of it in a couple of different ways. You can think of this esset as being the form of sum, or we can borrow this infinitive again, fictum esse, right? Fictum esse, and we can slap a T on it. So this is one completed synopsis. We will do many, many more. I hope this was helpful for you to go through it a little slowly, hear me explaining the rules, and hopefully when we get together on Friday, we'll have more targeted areas that we want to review. And most importantly on Friday, let's hope there are no internet issues, so I don't have to go vlogging on my phone with you guys. Okay? So I'm going to cut the video here. That'll be a little under 30 minutes. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you on Friday. Have a good one.